the problem. But there is a place for evolution. But that's not what I'm talking about. This ancient story coming from the ancient and prehistoric world has dominated all the cultures of the world. And what that implies, I believe, is there's going to be some kind of a mutation of the human race in order to take the human family on the earth to a new style of life in the universe. And so what will be lost will be your humanity, your ability to show love and kindness to other people. There will be no room for that. Emotions, there will be no room for emotions. There will be no room for the American system of freedom, liberty, and justice for all. That's gone. That's out. There will be no more freedom, liberty, and justice for all. No more family love. No more humanity. You know, man reacting to man. No, all of that's going to be gone.
Aren't you also saying, though, that there is a race of humans being actually, that this isn't going to start in the future, that it's already started?
Oh, yeah, it's already started.
The genetic modification of the human actually behind the scenes.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
You know, in the book of Genesis, in the Bible, the Old Testament in Genesis 18, the 18th chapter, I did a video on this. It talks about Abraham and Sarah and the prophet Abraham, and it says that three men, in Genesis 18, go back and read it yourself, says that three men come walking up into the camp. Abraham went out and greeted the three men and asked them to stay for dinner, and they said no. They were on their way to other business and did not have time to stop. And it says that Abraham insisted that they stay at least to have something to eat, and then they could go. And they agreed. So they said, all right, make it quick and we'll stay for something. And so the Bible says in Genesis 18 that Sarah, his wife, fixed dinner for them. They sat under a tree, had dinner with Abraham. And then it says, after dinner, two of the men got up and left to go on about their business. But the one that stayed was the absolute creator God, the one who had created the human creature. He sat with Abraham having dinner under the tree, and then gave prophecies to Abraham, and then got up and left. Now that's in Genesis 18. First of all, my question is, wait a minute. It says there were three men, and the three men came up and had dinner with Abraham. And then in Genesis 19, the following chapter, it says that those two men who had gotten up earlier and left were the two angels that went into Sodom and Gomorrah. And it says that when these two angels, or men, went into Sodom and Gomorrah, the homosexuals saw these guys, these two men, and thought that they were absolutely handsome, beautiful, good-looking men, and they were attracted to the homosexuals. We'll go read it in Genesis 19. But that tells me, if those were the same two men that were with Abraham having dinner, the scripture says they were absolutely handsome, good-looking, handsome men. And God, the Creator, is still sitting under the tree with Abraham having dinner. And it says God in all capital letters. The Creator of the human race is there with Abraham. So I'm just saying that I'm sure that there are spiritual interpretations of all this, but I think there is a legitimacy about the story. That when we read in Genesis where God walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening, the word in Hebrew, God walked with Adam, that Hebrew word means you can hear a footstep, stepping on leaves, stepping, you can hear the footsteps. That's what the Hebrew word means. So when we poetically say, well, God probably was with Adam and Eve spiritually. No, the word in Hebrew says God walked with Adam. You could hear his footsteps on the leaves. All of this implies in the Old Testament that whoever created us looked like us. And that's why the scripture says, God says, come let us make man in our image after our likeness. That's in Genesis 1. Genesis 1 and 2, both. Many years ago, I talked with Rabbi Marvin Antelman. Rabbi Marvin Antelman from Massachusetts was a dear friend of mine. I think he's still alive today in the Knesset in Israel. But he and I used to talk long hours. And I asked him once about that scripture, come let us make man in our image after our likeness. And he said, both Jews and Christians misunderstand that scripture because they gloss over it too quickly. Most people think that when they read that scripture that God is saying, come, let us make a creature and we will call him man. Well, first of all, you got to ask, who is God talking to, himself? He's saying, come, let us. Who's us? So he said, come, let us make man in our image after our likeness. No. He said, no, that's not the way to translate it correctly. He's saying, the correct understanding is God is saying to someone, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Not make man. No, man's already here. But come, let us reform, mutate man. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And then later on in Genesis, it says, man has now become as one of us. Now he looks like us. So if that is true, then that means today, and I am totally convinced that this is the case, we have entities here from somewhere else, angels, gods, whatever you want to call them. Zechariah Sitchin calls them Anunnaki. But I am totally convinced of my own self that there are alien life forms here who look like humans. And yet they're not fully human. And of course in Genesis we're told that there's a world of difference. We understand in the book of Genesis a world of difference between an angel and a sons of God. Sons of God are not angels, and angels are not sons of God. Totally different concepts, totally different words. Sons of God are spirit entities, or entities from somewhere who look and have physical bodies and look like humans. They're called sons of God, while angels are spirit entities. So we're told in the Bible, again going back to Genesis, that the sons of God were messing around with women and got them pregnant. Well, I got to figure that these sons of God, their plumbing worked the same way, so therefore they could get women pregnant. And I cannot imagine a woman being talked into bed by some hideous creature from another world, but I can see it if it's a handsome, good-looking man. Well, that's what the Bible said. Even the homosexuals said they were beautiful, handsome men.
Okay, so...
So all of this I'm bringing out as biblical reference for my conclusion that I think Zechariah Sitchin is right. I think other people who have written about the same subject are right, that there are, in fact, entities here, life forms here, that have come here from somewhere else, and maybe they were the originals, and they are today, in my humble opinion, the people who are running this planet.
Okay,
it would not surprise me a bit.
Are these the Nephilim?
I don't know if they could be the Nephilim, because not all the Nephilim died at the flood. A lot of people, a lot of Christians will tell you, oh yeah, all the Nephilim died in the flood. No, that's not what the Bible says. It says that there was one of the Nephilim lived through the flood. His name was Og of Bashan, O-G. Og of Bashan was one of the Nephilim, and he lived through the flood and could reproduce and reproduce more like himself. We know that there have been skeletons found and way down in the earth around the world that are far bigger than we humans are today. Some of them are 16 feet long, some of them are 20 feet long, 12 feet long. So I'm sure that there have been extraterrestrial, for lack of a better term, extraterrestrial life forms who have come here who we look like them. They don't look like us. They created us in their image and likeness.
Okay, but this new sort of ruler is their son, is the son of God, right? He's going to be ruling, In other words, between these two mountains. Now I'm wondering what the mountains are symbolized by.
Yeah, very good.
Because the mountains, are we talking about the Soviet Union and the U.S.? Are those the mountains where the sun is going to rise between those two mountains? Or are we talking about planets?
I think that we're talking about something deeper. The implications being that in all of the ancient world, there was always a concept in theologies of all the ancient cultures of the world used it, of twin towers, twin things, twin churches, twin towers. That's why that whole thing about the New York Twin Towers, that is in your face if you understand the symbolism of twin towers. And the Roman Empire and the Grecian Empire and Sumeria, Babylonia, especially in Egypt, they always had two obelisks. Yes. They always had the two towers, always. So there is a very powerful significance to the concept of twin towers. Very important symbolism.
So we've got twins and we've got basically Gemini. And how does that work in, are we talking about, I don't know, when this so-called God was born? Are we talking about, you know, the constellation under which he, or
I think it will probably be when he comes into power. This will be his symbol. His symbol will be the sun rising between the mountains of the east. Zechariah Sitchin talks about that. Many of the books on the ancient Middle Eastern religions have pictures of Shamash, the Hebrew god Shamash, meaning the sun, rising between the mountains of the east. That goes all the way back to the cuneiform pictures, you know, on the clay pictures from Sumeria and Babylonia or from Iraq. Pictures of the god rising between two mountains. Again, it's very difficult for me to make this intelligently understood because I don't have the pictures, and it would take me about 3 hours to lay the foundation for this.
I understand.
So I'm just giving you some brief glimpses into what I'm going to be doing soon on this video.
Is this ruler, are we talking about Marduk, or is Marduk already here and this is somebody who's coming after him?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But again, I would say it all boils down to one thing in my mind, that the human race on the earth is being prepared slowly but surely in a scientific method being applied to the human race to mutate the human race, to change us from being what we are today to a creature that the gods have in mind mutating again. Because if the Bible is correct, and if Zechariah Sitchin is correct, and all the other writers on the subject are correct.
This is a real detective story. This is a real detective story here. I'm on the edge of my seat thinking, wow, this is, you know, are we talking about the return of the Anunnaki? Is this connected with the Christian myth of the Second Coming?
That's right.
Is that, you know...
Not, this particular video is not really for, you know, people who are just coming to the subject. This actually is for people who have a background
understanding of all
and
this.
do understand and have possibly read Sitchin's work, for example, and are up to speed with even David Icke's work and our work,
and who may have been following you for many years, because in recent interviews, for example, on Coast to Coast, for example, you've hinted heavily that there are things which you're not ready to say yet.
Yes.
And a lot of people will be watching this wondering whether this is the time when you've chosen.
Well, that's true, yeah.
What we have established here is that there's a very predominant symbol, and you've talked about how it's permeated every aspect
Absolutely.
of life and religion, and that
Absolutely.
people are not really up to speed on what it really means
That's right.
for the human race. And this is sort of a stunning revelation for many people that are listening to this. But I would like to say what we are seeing right now is a rollout of an Illuminati agenda that involves population reduction. And what I'm curious is whether or not you can talk about how this agenda to do with the sun coming to the, you know, the throne of the world, if indeed this transpires, the creation of a new race of humans,
Right.
and how population reduction folds into that.
Well, I think if you're going to have a whole new race of humans, they are culture. That's why we refer to different races of people as cultures. And the culture is something under a microscope, you know, it's like a bacteria. And so that's what we are on the earth. We are a culture. And somebody has actually put us here as a culture, and that's watching us grow. And we have become a disease, you know, because we're killing everything in our path. And so I think that whoever it is that has created us, had created us, I believe, possibly already knew that in the far future, once this race is finally brought up to speed, and then we can move it to the next plateau. And this is what the Nazis were talking about. This is what Werner von Braun was talking about. The Nazis were big on this subject and using the symbol and the term that I'm talking about, the symbol between the mountains of the east. England, and interesting about this is England has always had a fixation on Egypt. England's big on Egypt, and go to the British Museum and all these different museums. The English were always big on Egypt, but the Germans were not. The Germans were always big on Iraq. That's what Germany was interested in, Babylon. And the reason why, I think, is because the Nazis and the German people in general, or at least the intelligentsia of the German establishment, realized this story that I'm trying to explain has to do with Babylon, it has to do with Iraq, and I believe that may be one of the reasons why the U.S. is in Iraq today.
Absolutely.
It has something to do with and I know this is true because I can prove that the symbols which are being used by the U.S. government today in Iraq is exactly the same symbols that I was telling you about that comes from the Anunnaki, from the Phoenician Canaanites, the Syrians, the Phoenicians, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Britannia, into America. The entire superstructure of civilization has been using the same word and terms and symbol that is today dominating in Iraq, but most people don't even know. They don't even see it. It's hidden in plain sight.
Okay, but there is a Stargate in Iraq that's fairly well known. That Saddam Hussein, apparently they had to get rid of him because he had found it and was able to control it while he was in power.
Yeah.
So in essence, the U.S. is never. I mean, it's been my theory that the U.S. is never going to leave Iraq, because basically they have to man that Stargate. They have to have control of that Stargate, which is where it is said the Anunnaki will return through that Stargate. Have you heard that theory?
Well, yeah, I have, absolutely. And one of my favorite speakers on that subject is William Henry. And William and I have been around the world together and went to Egypt together. We talked a long time about Stargates. I understand the story. I didn't say anything about Stargates. That's William Henry's work that influenced me in that direction. But I am aware that Hollywood is talking about Stargates. They're making movies about it. And I did a lecture series with Al Bielek and Preston Nichols. I did 2 weekend seminars in which the 3 of us spoke together back in Philadelphia, and I had some time to sit and talk with Preston Nichols. And incidentally, I am highly impressed with Preston Nichols.
Okay.
You have to be highly impressed with that man when you sit and talk with him.
Okay.
Because he is a very, very interesting man. He's got a lot of very good information on the kind of thing I'm talking about in private with him. And he was enlightening me to some of the things I'm seeing and saying.
But he's heavily involved in the Montauk story.
Absolutely.
And the Philadelphia experiment
Right.
being the early precursor of that. And then also time travel,
Exactly.
which is where Montauk was headed. And then you get into the Stargates and
Right.
so on. And this has something to do with letting in. Now I'm theorizing here, so I want you to help me. But my understanding with the Montauk Project was that there were some openings made in not just the timeline, but also in space, so to speak, where certain races were able to come in through an open door, basically, that was created by the Montauk Project. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the genetic engineering of our planet, such that they were coming in to do a job.
Well, yeah, I think all of that has some validity. I don't know that much about the Stargate itself concept. I understand it, but I mean, that's not my subject, but it plays into my subject. It's part of it, and it must be important because Hollywood's making movies about it all the time, and they actually have television shows, Stargate. So I'm sure there's something very legitimate about the concept. All I'm saying is that when I was talking and spent two weekends with Al Bielek and Preston Nichols and myself, I was very impressed with both Al Bielek and Preston Nichols, because in my opinion, sitting with them for hours on end and working with them over the weekend, both of them are extremely interesting, provocative people that have just got a lot, and I was having fun downloading all this stuff to Preston, and he's saying, yeah, well, here's something else you didn't see. And so I have the highest regard for...
That's wonderful to hear, actually, because I do think there's great validity there and some very important...
I think Preston Nichols is absolutely
clues.
Sensational. I love everything. He was such a gracious and such a gracious person, helpful, kind, courteous, and brilliant to sit and talk with. So I love Preston Nichols.
I hear you. Now, what about Zecharia Sitchin? When he talked about the Anunnaki, there was a group of the Anunnaki that went to Mars, that left this planet, and then actually, some of which I guess came from wherever the Anunnaki came from, and never actually even made it here. So there's a group that kind of went back to Mars, and then some that came from, according to Sitchin. And so what I'm wondering is, what was going on with Mars? And we know that Hoagland has gone down that road quite a distance. But I think that you've given him many of the clues and the basis for his work. And there's something to do with, now I'm not an expert on this, but I do understand that the positioning of the Great Pyramid and the significance with the association with Mars, and then of course we're talking about Babylon, and Babylon and Mars are symbols for the same thing, isn't this right? And the Whore of Babylon, and there's something going on there. And
that's right.
Maybe
that's what I'm talking about.
Talk about that a little bit, about Mars and the significance with the Anunnaki and where that might be leading.
And the very word Cairo, as you probably know, Cairo means Mars.
Exactly.
That's
so
another word for Mars.
What
is
is
Cairo.
going on with that?
Yeah. That is a subject which Richard is probably better suited to talk about than I, because I really haven't looked at Mars over and above the general kind of stuff he talks about. But yeah, I totally believe for myself that Mars is inhabited. And I do believe that there's probably humans like us there. What was his name? Quite a long time ago, I had a long conversation in Mesa, Arizona with Virgil Armstrong Postlethwaite. Virgil Armstrong and I sat in a restaurant in Mesa, Arizona many years ago and talked about the people who were on Mars. And Virgil was the guy, from what I gather, was the man who came up with the idea. He was a military CIA operative, and he's the guy that came up with the idea for Green Berets. That was his idea, Green Beret, and he worked with the CIA. And so I loved sitting and talking with Virgil Armstrong. But he brought out about how, in that conversation, how there were many thousands of people or more like us, humans like us, on Mars at that time. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
What year was this that you were talking about?
This was probably 50, that was probably 80, mid-80s.
Amazing.
I would say 85, 86, 87, something like that.
Okay, well that does dovetail also with our experience with our witness Henry Deacon. Arthur Neumann is his real name. He's come out under that name recently and said he's been to Mars. So I'm wondering if you have any information that's come to you about jump gates, about going between planets?
Well, yes and no. The only thing I have of any value was someone else's work. I sat and talked with him. And he is a very, very knowledgeable, very legitimately. When he worked for the United States Naval Observatory, he was in charge of the Naval Observatory, and he just passed away just recently. But his website is so extraordinary. The stuff he's got, the stuff he has on that website, pictures of strange things found on Mars. And they're not nebulous things, they're in your face. I mean, those tubes, plexiglass tubes,
Yes,
and lights in those tubes. There's just an enormous amount of stuff he has on his website.
Well, our attention was drawn to that by Henry Deacon as well, to those tubes, which is a fascinating.
Yeah, I always say I'm not the world's foremost authority on anything. If there's any value in my person and my work, I would say this, that I have been privileged to be in the company of extraordinary people doing extraordinary work. And I have been privileged to sit in their company and be accepted by them and be able to learn things behind the scenes that other people will never be privy to hear.
Isn't it true, though, that you were told that you have a mission that is going to come to the fore late in life?
Yeah.
And that you might actually be there now? Do you want to tell that story at all?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mentioned this, I think, on Coast to Coast once, but it was very quickie because George wants to hear all the stories as long as it's within a minute and a half. But
we have longer than that.
Yeah, but when I was 19, I ended up in Los Angeles at 19 years old with $7 in my pocket, incidentally. I had no idea where I was going, where I was. I ended up in Los Angeles on a Friday night with $7 in my pocket. And, a stupid kid, but I lived through it. But later on, a couple months later, after I got a job and things were working out for me, I was in North Hollywood one morning, on a weekend morning, and I went into a restaurant, and the place was crowded, and there was only one seat available, and that was at the counter. So I sat at the counter, and there was a young girl sitting next to me, so we started talking. Come to find out, she only lived about 2 blocks from me, and I only lived about 2 blocks from town. So she had walked downtown, I had also. So we started hanging out together. I'd meet her downtown, we'd hang out together. And this is back in '59, and I was 19 years old. And so when we would walk home, I lived 2 blocks closer, so she had 2 blocks further to go. So I never knew exactly where she lived, but she knew where I lived. One night she came over to my place and said, "My dad wants to see you. He wants to talk to you." And of course that put me on alert. I said, "I don't want to talk to your dad, right?" And she said, "No, my father is a very important and interesting man. He wants to talk to you. He's got something to tell you." So that sounded interesting, so I went with her. And when we walked up to the house, which was only a couple blocks away, we walked up to the house. Just by chance, he happened to be coming out of the house. And the moment I saw him, I got an incredible feeling came over me of some kind of a euphoric, strange, wonderful feeling that I got being in his presence. It was as if I were in the presence of a great prophet or some spiritual man. I felt it, and I loved the feeling. I mean, I can't describe it, but I loved the feeling. It was an otherworld feeling. And I noticed that he was very much in control of himself. He knew exactly what he was doing, so he motioned for us to come in. We went in, and we sat, the girls sat on the floor, the fireplace, they sat on the floor. He sat on one end of the sofa, I sat on the other end of the sofa. The wife was in the kitchen. I never did see her that whole night. And so we were talking, and he was you know, just, he was asking me how I like living in California and how do you have a job and how do you like your job? And just small talk. And I was beginning to feel a little, the apprehension was going away. I was beginning to feel a little bit better being in his company. But I knew there was something about this guy that wasn't right. But I loved the feeling. And I'm 19 years old, so I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm just talking to this guy who's dazzling me with his presence of mind and the presence he presented. And so we're talking about all kinds of things. And then when he felt that I was sufficiently at ease, he said to me very nonchalantly, he said, remember when you were 8 years old back in Florida and your father built a new back porch and your uncle helped him, and remember your dad used green lumber that smelled funny and he built a new back porch? You remember that? And tears started to come to my eyes. And I didn't want to show tears in front of my girlfriend, but he was scaring me because he was right. And he knew it. And he said to me, well, did that happen or didn't it? And I said, yes, that happened. And he said, also, one night when you were in bed, you got out of bed and you went out in the back porch. And you were looking at the moon, and the moon was full. You remember that? And I said, yes, I remember that. And he said, and you were picking the wood because it smelled funny. It was green lumber, it smelled funny. And you were picking it with your finger. Remember how you picked a piece of it and you were smelling it and tasting it? And he said, remember doing that? And now I'm really scared because it's frightening to me. And I said, yes. And he said, well, did you do that or didn't you? I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, how would I know that? How would I know what you did? And I said, I don't know how you know. And he said, I know because we were there. You just didn't see us, but we were there watching you. And I thought, well, and he said, well, because he could tell I was not buying it. He said, was I correct in what I said? Yeah, well, how would I know if I wasn't there? And he said, we were there. And I said, who was we? He said, that's not important right now. What's important for you to know is that you're in California because we brought you here. We brought you here to Los Angeles. And I said, you brought me here? He said, yeah, why are you here? I said, I don't know why I'm here. I just had to come to Los Angeles. He said, that's right. We brought you here. He said, because what did you say to God? You talked to God that night. The night you sat on the porch, you said something to God. What did you say? And I just sat and looked at him. He said, I'll tell you what you said. You said you asked God to let you do something important with your life. You wanted to do something of value and importance with your life. And that was about 8 or 9 years old, right? I said, yes, that's what I said. And he said, well, then we're going to give you an opportunity to do something with your life then, because you did ask. And I'm still amazed listening to him. And he said, what we have for you to do will not happen until the later part of your life. And I'm not going to go into it right now, he said. I'm not going to go into explaining it to you now. However, when the time comes for you to do what we have brought you here to do, you will know what you have to do. By that time, you will be sufficiently knowledgeable on who you are and what you're doing and where you're going. And he said, all you need to know now is that we brought you here and that we will protect you wherever it is that we put you. And I asked him, I said, I still don't understand what you're saying. And he said, you don't need to, but one day you will understand. And he said, so I'm here to start you on your journey. He said, I have a book I'm going to give you, and I want you to read the book, and that will begin your journey. And he pulls it off the shelf and gives it to me. And today you can still get that book in bookstores anywhere. It's called The Complete Works of Charles Fort, F-O-R-T. Even in England, there's a Fortean Society dedicated to the work of Charles Fort. Fascinating book. It's a monumental work. Very thick book. Complete Works of Charles Fort. And he opened the book indiscriminately, just put his hand on the page, because it's a very thick book, and he opens the page and he reads a paragraph. He just opened the page and reads a paragraph. He knew exactly what he was doing. precisely what he was doing. I didn't know because it looked like he just indiscriminately opened it. And he read a paragraph that just blew me away. I was knocked out by what he just read. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And he said, oh yeah, the book is filled with that kind of thing. Let me read you another one. And he opened it up again and just indiscriminately read something. Not indiscriminately. He knew what he was doing. I'm sure that he knew how to get your particular attention. What would be very interesting to you, I may not even see. But he knew how to play on my emotions. And he read about 3 little paragraphs, one after the other. And each one, to me, was absolutely mind-blowing. And I was fascinated with him, with my new girlfriend, and with this book. And then he said to me, he said, you've always been interested in UFOs and otherworldly things, right? And I said, yes, I have. He said, would you like to see some UFOs up close tonight? And I said, I'd love to. He said, well, come on, I can do that for you. And so I got up with him and the 2 girls, my girlfriend and her sister. Now the 4 of us come out in the yard, it's about maybe midnight in North Hollywood, 1959, and he looks up into the sky and starts inaudibly talking. His mouth is moving as if he's talking to somebody, but nothing, you can't hear him. And as I'm watching him standing there talking to the stars, I look over at my girlfriend and she's looking at me. And the look on her face was like, yeah, this is my father, that's him. I told you it was strange, didn't I? That kind of thing. And her sister was looking at me, and I could tell what she was doing. She was trying to figure out, how is he taking this? How is he, what's going on in my mind, what the little one was thinking? Because she's seen this before. She wants to see how I'm going to react to this. And so he said, and then he looks at me and he said, they said that they will be coming from Griffith Park in just a minute. There'll be 3 of them. And they'll be coming from Griffith Park area. They're going north, and they said that they'll be here in a minute for you. And I said, who's they? He said, you'll see. And within a couple of minutes, 3 beautiful disc-shaped things, glowing, very faintly glowing, came over with no sound whatsoever, and a triangle formation, came over and stopped right above our head and stopped. And when they did, you could see they were disc shape, and it looked and appeared like it was like a pie cut in 6 or 8 slices, and each slice was a different color. And what I remember distinctly is each color was like laser color, vibrant orange, vibrant pink, very vibrant colors, 6 or 8 colors on each one, and they were circulating, not so fast as to blend the color, but circulating. And they were beautiful, and they were about the size that the full moon appears. So they're not little lights, full moon size, 3. And I'm standing there looking at these gorgeous, beautiful, vibrant color things spinning in colors and no sound. And I was absolutely mesmerized. I was enthralled by seeing this gorgeous, beautiful display. And I looked at him, and he's looking at me. And he says, they're pretty, aren't they? And I said, yes, they're beautiful. And then he looks up and talks to me. He said, they told me to tell you that they're going now, but they'll see you later. And they did. They started moving, and they went out north. And afterwards, we went back in, and I said, what did I just see tonight? And he said, that was us. We've been here for a long time. You just didn't know it. And he said, we picked you a long time ago when you were a small child. We have something for you to do. And I said, I'm not understanding exactly. He said, you don't have to. We will let you know what it is you're supposed to do later on in life. He said, but just go on with your life. Don't worry about it. Whatever you're supposed to learn, we'll see to it that you learn. And when it is time for you to do what we have for you to do, you'll know. We'll let you know. And after that, I would go over there on the weekends to visit him and the mother and the 2 girls. And we would go out to the desert sometimes and go way out in the desert. And the girls with their mother would go for a walk, and he and I would walk in the desert. and he would tell me about all the different alien life forms that are out there, where they have come from, the ones that are here. And he told me, you have enemies here. You have some very powerful enemies here from other places that have come, and they know who you are, and they know what you're going to do. So just be careful in your life, but we'll protect you. I don't know what he's talking about. And then one day I went over to the house one morning, and the house was totally open, and they're gone. Everything was packed and gone, and the girl never told me she was leaving. They never come to tell me anything. They were just gone. Now that I look back on that experience, I feel very secure in saying that he knew what he was doing. He said, I'm starting you on your journey, and he did. But after that was done, then he moves on.
Do you believe that you're at that place, that juncture where he was talking about you're going to know? Has another message come recently, or do you feel that you're right on the cusp of something?
I feel I'm on the beginning of something, and I'm still not sure what all of this means. I'm not sure what it means. All I know is that I have some valuable stuff that's going to really knock people out when they see it, but I don't understand it fully yet. And I've talked with Zechariah about it. I've talked with many other speakers and people that are in the speaking circuit that are knowledgeable in the subject. But my gut feeling, and incidentally gut, G-U-T, is simply God in Scandinavian. You know, God is English, dog spelled backwards. But God in, I think it's Sweden and Scandinavian countries is spelled G-U-T. So when you say you got a gut feeling, that's God in Scandinavian. So, but my gut feeling is that I don't know the full picture yet. But I'm getting there now. After 48 years, I now know that my 48 years of study, day in and day out, researching, reading, staying in libraries, was for a reason. So that when the time would come, I would at least be sufficiently educated in this dark subject, which I'm talking about. At least I've got some background in it now, to be able to understand the significance of it. And I think it's really frightening to me. It actually is still rather frightening, because being human and watching the world where it's going, and I already know the symbols, the words, the terms. I already know the history of the secret societies and the movements of the bankers. I've sat and talked with all kinds of people around the world. With Hakim, my dear friend Hakim, the Kemite priest in Egypt. And we sat out by the pyramids at night and talked about the ancient Kemite priesthood, and I was blessed in the pyramid. Hakim blessed me in the king's chamber, laid in the sarcophagus, and he did a whole prayer ritual over me. And I've sat, like I said, for hours and talked with him in private about my things that have happened to me. So I am totally convinced that there's nothing special about me, but I have been given the opportunity to be in the company of fascinating people, to learn monstrously fascinating things, and ultimately I think that there is something for me to do. I'm just not sure yet what it is.
Do you happen to have an idea what race this man was from? Do you have a planet? Do you have any idea? In other words, do you think he was Anunnaki? Do you think he was Nordic? Do you think he was Plejaren? Do you have any idea?
No, not really. Because he appeared to be an extraordinarily ordinary looking guy. Just an ordinary guy you would meet. But when I was in his presence, it was monstrous, the feeling. I knew this is not a normal man.
Did his children have a different aura or a different feeling about them?
No. No, they seemed to be very ordinary. The mother.
But didn't you tell me just recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were out in the desert